Hello, and welcome to Real Talk Podcast. I'm Mike, your Real Talk Podcast host. My mission is to seek out those who took advantage of CDCR's rehabilitation programs and found themselves on the road to success. Our guest today is Ron Self. Ron is a former combat veteran who served in the Marines from 1987 through 1997, and later made some choices that ultimately landed him at San Quentin State Prison, where he would ultimately go on to create a rehabilitation program specified for veterans inside of prisons. Ron, please tell us about yourself and your program.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So, to condense a very long story, at 6 years old, due to a conflict at home, some family problems, I went to go live with my grandparents. And my grandfather was a career Marine. And at the age of 6, I was a little rambunctious, a little acting out quite a bit because I didn't understand what had transpired between my parents and myself that caused me to go live with my grandparents. I didn't fully understand what was shared with me by them. I guess to give better context, at the age of 6 years old, my dad leaned down, put his hands on my shoulders. He said, "You were a mistake. You shouldn't have been born. You're the reason your mother and I are getting divorced, and I'm going to Vietnam." And that was the last time I saw my dad. As all I knew as a 6-year-old, that my hero, my father, was gone and was leaving, and it was my fault because I was a mistake. As you can imagine, a 6-year-old doesn't really know what to do with that. I started acting out, and my grandparents decided it was probably best that I go live with them to have a little bit more structure. My grandfather, being a career Marine, took me fishing one day. He had a list of like 47 questions that were given to him by a psychologist and some people at a school. And after answering those questions, he asked me if I would be interested in going and participating for the rest of my life in a military school, kind of like Boy Scouts, he said. And I said, sure, if my cousin Dave can come with me, who was living with me at my grandparents at the time. So from the age of 6 up to 22, I was in that school. It was a military school. It was out at Fort Ord area, Monterey. It was then an active military army base. But past Fort Ord by Big Sur, there was a military school. So junior high, high school, college, I was in that school while also receiving training to go on to become a Marine. That was the whole idea of the program that I was in. So at the age of 22, having already had my master's, I officially joined Marine Corps in 1987, raised my hand and swore allegiance. And yeah, the next 10 years of my life was downrange with the Marine Corps in combat, or at least 8 years of that.
Wow. So really from your youngest years, you pretty much saw your life heading towards being a Marine.
Yeah, I really literally didn't know anything else. And truthfully, for the first time in my life, even if I feel like I belonged at home, I didn't feel a part of the family. I always knew that I wasn't welcome. I was indeed a mistake. My sister was the planned child. I was not. And this sentiment, this feeling is something that I know is prevalent in the prison system. I've met with a lot of guys, and it's nothing new. What I come to find out was I'm not the lone stranger. I'm not this poor little guy that had this experience. So many people have that same experience. The difference was I was able to go to my grandparents, who then put me in that military school. While I was doing the military school, and the education that I received from the Marine Corps was a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in psychology, and a doctorate in sociology, all meant for the purposes of psychological warfare. Fast forward, when I found myself on sabbatical in prison, that education came in handy. It served me well.
Yeah, I can imagine. You know, the more tools you have, more or less, in your belt, the better.
So, when you arrived to prison, how did you feel about yourself? Like, what were your thoughts?
So, to give a little better context for people, maybe I should talk a little bit about my crime. Long story short, I shot someone in an effort to stop them from being killed. It's that simple. Clearly, there's a lot more to it than that. I had someone that I really looked up to, I call him a good friend. He felt he needed to have somebody killed. He was misinformed. I didn't want to see him get in trouble. I agreed to do that with the intention. My plan was to make it look like I tried and missed, and I did just that. Um, it played out just like that. Unfortunately, how I did that was shooting at him on a freeway, which is completely egregious and just not something you do in the United States of America. That's all fine and dandy in combat or in a combat situation, but how I handled that, how I rationalized it in my mind, it was just egregious beyond comprehension, really. Now, where I was with my state of mind at the time was, this is 5 months after I came back from Rwanda, April 1994, when all the guys on my team that I grew up in that school I just mentioned, they all got killed in about 9 seconds. My cousin Dave was one of them on my father's side. And I came back and I was very much disillusioned. So I did that. I eventually was indicted and convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and murder for hire. I was sentenced to 32 to life. I went to prison. So when I first arrived at prison, I mean, and to be honest, I could have not been caught. I did everything to get caught. I left the truck where it could be found. I called collect from the spot on a payphone for someone to come and pick. I did everything but jump up and down and raise my hand and say I did it. In fact, I denied I did it, but I did so many things to get caught. Looking back now, it was a form of societal suicide. I at the time didn't have it in me to kill myself. Maybe I was too much of a coward to kill myself. And I removed myself from society that way. Going to prison, my mindset was that I had a lot of internal rage that I put myself there. I put myself in prison. Also, I had a lot of guilt and shame because I felt that I let the Marine Corps down, my family. That was my family. It is still my family. And they've embraced me, and they embraced me the whole time. But I felt I let my teammates down. I felt I let the Marine Corps down. And there was a lot of shame and guilt associated with that. So when I came to prison, I was a handful. 32-year-old Force Recon Marine, all the training in the world, 8 years of combat experience. I'm Native American. I look Caucasian, but I refuse to play prison politics. So anyone that knows anything about prison, if you're going to take that stance, it could be a lonely stance, and it could be a very violent stance. Fortunately, the stars aligned for me. By being Indian, that removed me from a lot of prison politics. They treated me a little bit differently. They had my C-file. They knew who I was. They knew what I was about. So there's a lot of things that lined up for me, just in a way I just can't really articulate. I think at 23 years of incarceration, I was only locked down like 14 days, where all the other races are locked down for like years at a time because they're fighting with each other. This allowed me an opportunity to interact with all races. I always approached prison from the stance that, look, I'm not playing the race card. I'm not playing the political card. I'm a Marine. I work with veterans. If you're a veteran, I'll work with you. Around 2011, fast forwarding, I came to prison in 97, fast forward to 2011, started taking some self-help programs, started really doing some introspection, looking at myself. The Vogue program was instrumental in that, followed by the GRIP program. I was actually doing both those programs together. And it's kind of like a water in a dam, right? First drop gets through, then more gets through. The next thing you know, the dam breaks open. And when I came to the conclusion that I had so badly shamed myself, my teammates, the Marine Corps, I braided a rope and tried to hang myself. I went into my cell and I did just that. I remember looking at my watch about 5 minutes into it thinking, how long is this going to take? As if I had somewhere to go. I passed out. I woke up 45 minutes later on my knees in the cell. No one was to the wiser. And I had a few epiphanies while I was there on my knees with that rope around my neck. And I thought about a program, and I actually thought about the words, My first counselor when I came to prison, my first CC1, was the former director of corrections, Ralph Diaz. And what he said to me at that time, he called me in his office and he said, "Have a seat, Ron. Not inmate self, nothing, just have a seat, Ron." And he was looking at my file. He closed it. He slid it to the side. And he said, "You're better than this. You can do better than this. Have a nice day." So fast forward all the way to 2011 when I hung myself. That's the thought that came to mind, what he said to me then. And I spent the next year going to the Prison University Project, doing English 204 class. So I researched PTSD, moral injury, resiliency, inoculation training, and I compiled a 52-week curriculum that the California Department of Corrections, San Quentin at the time, allowed me to do a pilot program. And from that pilot program, that led to a TED Talk. And while I was incarcerated, we received funding from CDCR to replicate the Veterans Healing Veterans program. And as I understand it, that's the first program in the history of CDC that an inmate created and received funding for while he was still in prison to create the program, or rather replicate the program. At that time, Mary Donovan was our director. And the rest is kind of history. Now we're in 5 prisons. I've been to Congress. I've met with the president. I've met with Congress. We're working with the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and implementing a boot camp out program, what I talk about in the TED Talk. And yeah.
Well, it sounds like there was a lot that happened between 1997 and 2011 when you attempted suicide.
Yeah.
And kind of made this this drastic change. Can you kind of talk about what led to that moment? That's 97 through 2011 is a big gap. What led to it?
So the first, 5-6 years from 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So all in all, 2007 was a fair amount of denial on my part. There was a lot of rage. There was a lot of, nah, I don't need any programs. I've got degrees in psychology and sociology. That's for you guys. I know what's up with me. There was a lot of denial, absolute denial on my part. And again, when I finally transferred in 2010 to San Quentin Prison, everyone knows San Quentin is pretty much the jewel in the crown of CDCR when it comes to programming. They have like 300 volunteers a week, 78 programs. It's just a phenomenal place to go. And I went to my first group. Again, I joined the Guiding Rage into Power and the VOGUE program, Victim Offender Education Program. I was going to both of those at the same time. And there were conversations that were going on into that that just started seeping into my psyche, I guess you could say. And I went from sitting there in these groups, not saying anything, with my arms folded, say, that's you, not me. I don't need to do that. I'm just here for the board so I can get my certificates. But the more I sat there and the more I listened, the more I would think about how my life unfolded. And again, I started actually doing the work. For me personally, and I think it's important that people distinguish themselves, right? Look at themselves individually. Being raised in a community that revolved around a code of honor, and duty and discipline. What resonated for me is, I said, I felt I violated that code, and I brought a lot of disrespect and shame to myself in the Marine Corps. And it's something I couldn't reconcile with. And the more work I did, the more I came to the conclusion that, wow, I just didn't know how to reconcile with it. And that led to me, over a week's period of time, braiding the rope and actually hanging myself. And that was really the wrong approach to take. And I thank goodness the rope did break, right? Because that's not the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is to continue to look in on oneself, to look in and look at the core root of the problems. And for me and what we do in Veterans Healing Veterans is we go all the way back to our childhood and we look for the first significant event or traumatic event. And we create an autobiographical narration moving forward, encompassing all events. And in so doing that, I learned a few things. I learned a lot of things, actually. I learned that my parents did the best that they could with what they had at the time. They were dealing with what they had to deal with. Um, I think one of the biggest things I realized is not taking things so personal. We all have journeys, we all have stories, we all have backgrounds. They're all obviously very different. What I've ultimately realized post hanging myself, I was some real cognitive dissonance going on there. I mean, in one hand, I felt I didn't deserve to be around. And on the other hand, I truly believed that I was worthy of redemption. Where I'm at post trying to hang myself is I believe that all human beings are worthy of redemption. When the parole board told me they were granting me parole and they found me suitable, I made them a promise. And that was that I would spend the rest of my life and I would do more with this second chance than any other parolee has. Now, I don't know where I'm at with that, but I do know that I'm doing everything I can to live up to that. And I will continue to do so the rest of my life. I've said it before, and this applies to all veterans. At one point in time, we were trusted to carry a weapon in defense of this country, and I violated that trust in really the most egregious way. And I'm okay spending the rest of my life trying to gain that trust back. Although I may never have that level of trust again, I'm okay with spending the rest of my life trying to gain that trust back and trying to show other people that there are better ways and better choices to make than ones that lead to suicide or prison.
And when you were taking those courses and those programs and participating and actively engaging and trying to almost get the most out of kind of your period there, do you feel like those programs and being involved in those programs assisted in your daily life now?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. There's so many tools came out of those programs, and there are many programs. I can't name them all off. But those were the two big ones that impacted me. And even those programs, as phenomenal as they were, I felt they didn't go deep enough for a veteran. I remember one time specifically sitting in a process circle where I shared an event of combat that resulted in that very cousin I talked about being blown in half with an RPG, and then I shot him in the head to put him out of his misery. And there was just crickets in the room. Nobody knew how to respond to that. And at that moment, I realized how good this process was, but I also felt it needed to go deeper. But I learned so much from those programs. One of the things that came out, I think the theme in a lot of those programs was there tends to be a habit for people in prison to paint themselves as the victims. Accountable language is important. You know, you used to hear a lot, oh, well, I caught this case. You know, it's not a baseball game. You didn't go out and catch a case. It wasn't a fly ball. We made a conscious choice. I made a conscious choice to do something that landed me in prison with a 32 to life sentence. And after you get over the denial of your own denial, and that's the thing, denial of denial, a lot of good work can be done as far as that internal introspection. So, I mean, I could go on all day talking about that stuff. The reality is, like I said, I sat there for several months in these classes with my arms folded. Nah, this doesn't apply to me. This doesn't apply to me. And when I finally did engage and I finally did start to share and embrace the process, it was incredibly liberating. I realized that I wasn't a bad person. I've made some bad choices. Those programs are phenomenal. They're the reason that I was able to get out of prison and self-correct and course-correct my life. The hang-up for me was that military code, that Marine Corps code, and more specifically that Spartan ideology that was hammered into me as a child, and that is that you have a code of honor, discipline, and you will never do anything to disgrace that. I spent my entire life training to help people that can't help themselves. Now, in my mind, I justified my actions by I was stopping him from getting killed, right? But how I did it harmed so many other people on the freeway psychologically. When I shot at Dr. Shoemaker and that window shield broke, the lady next to him in the car, the terror on her face, the only time I'd ever seen that terror was in combat. And the difference was we were there to stop the people causing that terror. And on this day, I was the one causing it. And that just, when that resonated with me, yeah, it was harsh. And I thought about that a lot. And to be honest, the only way I was able to really get past all that was when I went to my first parole hearing, and Mrs. Shoemaker was there, and she read a letter that her husband wrote the day he got shot by me, forgiving me for what I did. And then she forgave me, and her kids forgave me. That was an emotional gut punch I just never experienced in my life. It wasn't her intention. It wasn't by design. But when she said she forgave me and that her family forgave me, it felt as though I was being cleansed for every bad thing I've done in my life. And I wrote a rather long letter to them that I read at the last board, and it was received very well, and it was very genuine. And I said just what I just said to you in that letter, but it freed me in a way. Her forgiveness allowed me to forgive myself. And that's something that a lot of guys in prison really need to do. They have to really be able to realize that they, like their parents and everybody else, was given a certain hand. They're playing that hand, but it's okay to forgive themselves. In fact, they need to.
Absolutely. Your ability to kind of attend programming and then forgive yourself and take the necessary steps has obviously led to an incredible post-release story. And I'm just curious, in your mind, what did, I'm sure any listeners and viewers now are kind of itching at the bit of wanting to know your experience of what were your first few months like upon release. You were kind of held into an environment, and now after years and years, you're just kind of released. If you wouldn't mind, what were those first few months like?
Yeah, it was a bit overwhelming. And I have to say, as a veteran, veterans have things available to them that the general population does not by virtue of being a veteran. What I mean by that is I had injuries I sustained in combat, so I left prison with 100% service connected. That translates to a pretty hefty dollar amount every month, tax-free for life. I had good financial, medical. One of my best friends, who was a captain in the Marine Corps when this all happened, went on to become a lieutenant general in the Marine Corps, one of the third highest ranking person in the Marine Corps. And he stood by my side the whole time and helped pay for continued college for me, in fact. So when I got out, I transitioned to the Veterans Transition Center. In fact, I asked the board that they order me there. That's a transitional housing program that I've since partnered with down in Marina, California, Monterey area, the old Fort Ord. And so I had a lot of support. I had a tremendous amount of support. Having said that, after spending several decades in prison on a very confined environment, even with that support, coming out and being free can be really overwhelming. It can be a bit of a shock. First couple nights trying to sleep, you're anticipating someone coming around shining a light in your face saying, let me see some skin, see some movement, because that's what your life is. Someone doing count every night when you're sleeping and wanting to wake you up to make sure you're alive. None of that was going on. And it was even with support, it can be overwhelming. My advice to people getting out is to take advantage of the support they have and to not be in such a rush to get on with their life. And what I mean by that is that transition from confinement to freedom can be almost too much for some people. It can lead to falling back into bad habits, maybe alcohol or drug or whatever, to deal with the stress of it. For me, it wasn't so bad, but I had my moments where it was just, when you go from a 6x12 cell to being able to walk on the beach and watch a sunset, actually watch a sunset, and actually see beyond 250 feet. Most prisons, there's a wall or a gate, and you can only see a certain distance. And when you're used to only being able to see that far, or only walk 2 minutes in any direction for decades, and then being able to just walk as far as you want, to do more or less whatever you want, it can be overwhelming. It's also, there's a tremendous amount of gratitude for being afforded the second chance that I was given. And I'm happy about that every day. One of the things that I noticed, though, not too long after I get out, is that I started reverting back to some of my old behavior. What I mean by that is I've always tended to be a aggressive driver, assertive, so to speak. And I noticed that in myself early on. It's like, hey, wait, this is the old Ron. I'm being a little heavy on the pedal here. Who knows what's going on in the car in front of me, why he's driving so slow or driving so fast or whatever. But I noticed that in myself. Everything just kind of, it comes pouring at you, all that freedom. And I think everyone handles it differently, obviously. But it took a little while for me to adjust. It took about 4 months for me to find my rhythm. Within 2 months of getting out of prison, though, one of the things that really helped me a lot is I was allowed to go back to prison to help facilitate the program that I had started, Veterans Healing Veterans. So within a few months of getting out of prison, I was back at Solano Prison with the help of headquarters facilitating the VHV program. And now I go into, or prior to COVID, I was going into about 7 prisons. And facilitating the program and running the program, expanding it. And now we're doing transitional housing with the VTC also.
Do you think that being engaged in that program after you were released was almost kind of like a booster, or kind of like a just concreted your new values? You know, what did that feel like being released? I can't imagine that's the norm at all, getting released from prison and then itching to go back into prison, or asking to go back into prison within a few months.
Yeah, so that actually helped me. Again, when I came to the VTC, Veterans Transition Center, I was embraced and they encouraged me to engage. And the best way for me to answer that question, going back into prison, I never adopted prison ideology. I never allowed myself to become institutionalized. I never bought into prison politics and all that stuff. That in and of itself caused me some problems. There were some staff that felt that I felt I was not an inmate and I should act more like one. Others were just knew that I was a Marine, and Marines are Marines. But how I did not buy into the prison politics, I think that has a lot to do with me going back into the prison system. I came back from combat without my team, without my guys. I felt leaving prison, and the 6,900 veterans that are in prison, it's the same type of thing. I found a mission in life, a new way to be in the world. And for me, that is going back into the prisons and working with the veterans that are inside and helping them come out like I came out. So I never had any issues with it. It was unique at first, right? At first it's like, wow, this is different. I can come and go. I haven't had this experience in a while. Normally when you leave the prison, it's in ankle chains and you're in a transport and it's a little restrictive. Now I was approved for a statewide card. I can go into any of the 35 prisons. I have chits, I can get keys, I walk around, and I'm treated with a tremendous amount of respect by staff, the administration. They treat me as an asset, not as a parolee or a felon. It's remarkable. That is a little confounding sometimes. It's like, wow, this is good. And they're giving me the trust to lead the way, so to speak. And I'm very conscious and aware that my actions, the path that I'm trying to blaze, so to speak, is so that others can follow behind me and represent the same way and show that we all are capable and deserve redemption. So that's my motivation, and that's what fuels me to go back inside. I love it. I love going inside and sitting in the circle with the men and doing the process work, and then seeing them come out. Now when the guys parole and they come out and they come to our program, I go pick them up at the prison and I bring them here. And there's just something I can't tell you how rewarding that is, to be able to be working with the very prison system that I put myself in, and then to have that prison system and the administration embrace me and treat me with civility and respect, and allowing me to prove that I have redeemed myself. And they're willing to let anyone do that. You just have to prove that you will do that.
I mean, it's just been an incredible story to kind of hear the shift in your mindset and your attitude and your actions, and you've come a long way. If you wouldn't mind telling our viewers where exactly you're at now, and what are you looking to grow to, or where are you headed in the future?
Well, I have this concept that I've been working on with some headquarters people of creating 3 veteran hubs in the state of California. So you would have Soledad Prison being the central hub, RJ Donovan probably the northern hub, and I haven't identified a southern hub, RJ Donovan, and the northern hub probably Solano or somewhere around there. And if we take these 3 hubs, right, and we divide the 6,900 veterans that are incarcerated into these 3 hubs, and then we have the Veterans Administration provide the service compensation examiners to all 3 sites, and they've already agreed to that. They'd be there 5 days a week processing service claims for these veterans, getting them there on their feet with their benefits, and more importantly, or just as importantly, when an incarcerated veteran goes to prison, he's incarcerated obviously, and he applies for his benefits, he's only allowed to receive 10%, not to exceed $140 a month of their total compensation. But their compensation can be up to $3,500 a month if they have 100% service connected. Now, while they can only receive 140 of that, their wives and their kids can receive an apportionment for the rest. So if we take these steps to create these veterans hubs, we can be setting the veteran up for success when they do eventually parole, and they can also contribute and lessen the burden on society by being able to help sustain their family members with the benefits that they still rate as veterans. So that's a concept we're working on right now. The first hub would be Soledad Prison, CTF. I've been working with the warden, Craig Koenig, and he and his entire staff, Captain Deverick and so many more are there. And we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel with these vaccinations and whatnot. So my goal for the prison is to create these hubs where we can centralize the services for these guys. And then after they get all their stuff squared away, then they can transfer to whatever's closer to home for them. Guys in reception would come straight to these hubs if they're veterans, get all their stuff done. So that's one thing that I'm working on. The other thing is the TED Talk I did in 2016. That's what got me before Congress and got me working with the Pentagon and DOD. So what I talk about in the TED Talk, a boot camp out program, we're moving forward to do a pilot program for the Marine Corps, just like the pilot program I did for CDCR.
That's awesome. Before we wrap it up here, is there any last little bits of advice you have for our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the people that are behind walls, predominantly, I would think, it's possible. Don't lose hope. I know there are times, because I've been there, some very dark times seemingly, where it seems like there is no hope on the horizon. There is hope on the horizon. You can get out of prison. Don't give up. Do the programs. Do the program. Every program you can go to it. If you have to do it over and over, do it over and over. But program. You can get out of prison. The way the direction prison is going, if you do the programs and you can truly identify where you went wrong, the causative factors of your decision-making process, and show that you've corrected them, identified where they went wrong and how you can correct them, you'll get out of prison and you can achieve anything. I never thought I would get out of prison. I went to prison with the charges I had of conspiracy, attempt, and murder for hire. There were no drugs, there were no alcohol. I'm an educated man. Had a lot of combat experience. I felt those factors, because of those factors, I would never get out of prison. But when I was real with myself, when I was truthful above all else with myself and the board, and I quit making excuses, again, being truthful is where it's at. And if you can do that, if you're willing to do that, and you can sit in that fire, as Jacques likes to say, and burn clean of that shame and that guilt and those things that caused us to make poor choices, your life can turn around. Your life will turn around. And you can go on to be as successful as you want to be. I mean, your imagination really is the limit. Some of the most resourceful, talented people I've encountered in my life were in prison. I was not someone that, by any respects, anyone thought would have gone to prison. Not with my military, my education, everything that I had going for me. Nobody ever would have thought I would have went to prison. In fact, had I stayed in the Marine Corps, I would have went on to be a command level staff officer like my friend did. He became a general in the Marine Corps. I became a different kind of leader, I guess you could say. And I would say also, you have to be able to forgive yourself. Once you can forgive yourself, other people can forgive you as well.
The Department of Rehabilitative Programs would like to thank Ron Self for sharing his story. Please stay tuned for future episodes. Thanks for watching.